The U.S. Supreme Court just handed down a major decision that could impact many immigrants who left their home countries in crisis in the 90s and want to become permanent U.S. citizens. For more on this, I want to bring in Jessica Levinson. She is the CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. All right, thank you so much for jumping in here with this decision coming down. Jessica, break down this case for us and what was being argued and what did the court decide?
This is a really interesting case, and it actually deals with statutory construction, meaning they're looking at the words of a federal immigration law and deciding what it allows. So there's a young man named Jose Sanchez. He comes to this country from El Salvador in 1997. By 2001, he's granted temporary protective status because he satisfies the conditions under that statute. What he says is, I come from a place where it's too dangerous to go back. Now, he has that TPS, that temporary status, for a number of years, and then he says, I want to be a permanent legal resident here. And so he applies again for permanent legal residency, but he's denied because the words of the statute for permanent legal residency require that you have an admission into this country. An admission is read to mean a lawful entry. The problem for him is that he did not lawfully enter the country, even though he later was granted that temporary protective status. You asked me what his argument was. His argument was, look, I was granted temporary protected status. We know why I had to come unlawfully. And today, Justice Kagan, a unanimous decision for the Supreme Court, said, we might agree with you, we might not agree with you, but we're not in the business of rewriting legislation. We are not lawmakers. I'm looking at the words of the statute. It says admission. That means lawful entry. You didn't lawfully enter, and our hands are tied here.
So, Jessica, what does the ruling mean for other people who came to the United States under similar circumstances?
Well, it means that they cannot obtain a permanent legal residency here. It means that if they did have a situation where they followed Mr. Sanchez's pattern, where he came to the country illegally, he was granted that protected status, that protected status essentially doesn't cure the unlawful admission for purposes of trying to obtain that permanent legal residency. So it means anybody who's in a similar situation cannot at this point try and obtain permanent legal residency without first leaving the country and then trying to come back.
So then they're sort of permanently in this temporary status? I mean, temporary suggests to me that it could come to an end at any moment. It seems like quite a sort of purgatory situation.
Well, he's not in immediate threat of, for instance, deportation, but you're exactly right to focus on that word temporary. And it's not designed as being a situation where you can stay in the country, for instance, for decades. And that's part of the reason why he wanted to say, I'm in this country, I live in this country, I want something more protective. I want permanent legal status. And really what the court is saying today is, if this is what we want, then we know the solution. Congress, you can write a new statute. You can change the wording of the statute. Because this isn't a constitutional decision, Congress can in fact go back and say, that's not the outcome that we intended here. So it really would be a matter of changing the word admission to mean lawful or unlawful when then granted temporary protective status, and that would cure the problem here.
So, Jessica, you sort of alluded to this, the unanimous ruling 9-0, even with the justices' leanings. Did that surprise you at all?
It doesn't surprise me, but I'm so glad you asked the question, because we tend to only talk about the cases that are 5-4, or I think coming up in the next few weeks will be 6-3, because those are the really hot button cases where your ideological leanings, frankly, do come into play. This is a case where if you're a member of the federal judiciary, you have to look at the plain language of what the statute says. In this case, it was fairly clear. You know, the plaintiff here had a really compelling and sympathetic story, but that doesn't mean that you get legal recourse. And so, it makes me smart to say it didn't surprise me. But in this case, I think the answer was preordained. And again, the court is saying with a pretty clear voice, this one isn't on us. This is on you, lawmakers. And it allows the court to say that we're doing our jobs as federal judges. We're not, editing line by line what congressional statutes say.
I don't know if there are any other immigration cases sort of on the schedule for the Supreme Court, but what does this ruling signal to you about the future of immigration cases that come before the court?
Yeah, I think that this case, we can't read too much more other than that it's a case of statutory construction, which means it's a case of the Supreme Court looking at the plain language of this particular statute. What does it mean more broadly? It means that even the quote unquote liberal or progressive members of the court aren't going to create a meaning, a reading of words that simply can't exist because they want to protect a very sympathetic person here. It means that all of the judges are speaking with a unanimous voice and saying, we can't go further than what we're allowed to do here.
We're expecting some other major decisions, Jessica, as soon as the Supreme Court's term comes to a close. What are you looking out for?
Yeah, we've been expecting these major decisions for weeks and weeks now. Every day every week the Supreme Court says we're going to have decisions. There are 22 decisions that are left to be made, and we don't have answers on big ones. You asked me, what are the big ones? The big ones are the Affordable Care Act. This potentially affects millions of people. The question in this case is the individual mandate that requires people to buy insurance, is that still permissible even though there's no penalty if you don't buy insurance anymore? And if that individual mandate is now not permissible because Congress zeroed out the penalty, can the rest of the Affordable Care Act stand? I think the answer to that one will be the individual mandate will be struck down, but the rest of the Affordable Care Act will stand. There's a big case dealing with voting rights out of Arizona and whether or not Arizona can have a law that says if on election day you vote out of precinct, your entire ballot is trashed. Or if you want to vote early and ask somebody else to turn that ballot in, it can only be a very few categories of people who can turn that ballot in. We're waiting on a big case dealing with a clash between religious freedom and freedom from discrimination, a case dealing with a foster care agency, a religious agency that said we don't want to place kids with same-sex couples. And there's a question as to whether or not they have to adhere to the city's anti-discrimination law in order to be a city contractor, whether they have to, in fact, place kids with opposite-sex couples. That's a really big question, again, of First Amendment rights, freedom from discrimination. I could go on, but they're big cases we're waiting for out of those 22. And the next decision day is Thursday, so we might have some more answers then.
All right, we'll be watching. Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for jumping on and talking us through these really important decisions. We appreciate it.